an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizard's Holiday, Chapter 10. In these chapters, we find out what was sort of left out of the official video of the choice being made. I'm curious as to why this was let out, and I don't really know what to make of the deal and what could be going wrong now. I'm a little confused about it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. Yama is here in the chat. Hello. I'm very curious because I'm going to read you guys some of the segments, and I'm not totally sure if I'm just missing something really obvious or if it's supposed to be that you could easily miss it, and that's why our main man here forgets or misses it. But I will be interested in your interpretations. And Yama, are you still reading along with me? Or are you ahead now and you already know what happens here? Yama's is still going along. Okay, so I'll be interested to hear your theory on this too. But first, we're going to start off with Dareen. Dareen, we start with her right where we left off at the end of the last chapter, where she is realizing that the only people that are around to handle Earth are her and her buds that are in the house with her. And otherwise, it does not seem like there are any available wizards. And she has been desperately trying to contact somebody this whole time. And Rashawn is off to the side, just watching, getting increasingly frustrated, and tells her that she's wasting time. And there follows quite a confrontation. This is one of those things that I find sort of unsatisfying. And this is something that I think just might be a personality problem for me. I like complete closure. And as human beings, that is rare. Complete closure doesn't happen. If it does, often it's far after the fact. And it's only in retrospect that you can see that you got complete closure. But in the moment, it doesn't feel like you did. In this case, this whole back and forth it feels like we're dancing around the point. So he says, "You're wasting time." She just kind of looks at him. And he says, "You don't trust me." "Not as far as I could throw you," Dareen said. "And why not?" Rashawn said. "Maybe because I'm not like you? Maybe not, but I'm still a wizard. The powers that be trust me if you don't." "And why?" Dareen said. "That's what I want to know. You're the least wizard-like wizard I've ever met. You don't even use wizardry if you can help it. You're a whole lot more interested in being a prince than in being a wizard the way it looks to me. But the rules say wizardry can't live long in the unwilling heart. How long do you think you're likely to be one of us if you keep acting the way you do? How long is it going to be before the act becomes the reality?" He stared at her, and it took Dareen several breaths to realize how stricken and then furious the look in his eyes was becoming. "That's it," he said. And he stood up. "That's it. I'm off home. I'm weary of your arrogance and your bad manners and your mistrust." "You're weary of my arrogance? You stuck up, self-centered, self-important, and I don't have to explain myself to the likes of you, you parochial, controlling little, always so sure you're right? Then go ahead, go home and be right there, where all your people are so busy bowing and scraping to you that none of them has the nerve to confront you when you're..." Suddenly Dareen's face was full of greenery, and a number of berries were looking at her from very, very close, in a chilly, annoyed sort of way. "You should stop this now," Philip said. Okay, so look. What Philip says is that you are afraid, and fear is clouding your thoughts, So take a second until you've gotten a hold of yourself and fear is no longer at the fucking, in the driver's seat, and step back and you'll see this a little better. Can I tell you how petty I am that all I could focus on was him telling Doreen that she was arrogant and had bad manners? Now look, personally, I know Doreen is arrogant, but I don't really know what she did that makes him feel that way. Is it the fact that she followed him into his home? When he said, I wondered how long it would take you to find me, was that him trying to be like, of course you would do something that was so like such a violation of boundaries? What I'm trying to do is see things from his perspective here and understand how he could even feel that way about her when it seemed to me that she was trying really hard to make everybody feel welcome and figure out a way to like get activities that would be enjoyable to everyone. And he was the one that was being really difficult about all of it. It's one thing to accuse somebody of just being like kind of an asshole. But when you have specific complaints like this, I want to know where you're coming from. And considering the way that Carmela behaved toward him, but he liked Carmela so much, I don't get what his problem with Doreen is. And I understand that this all needs to be set aside in favor of saving the planet. Like, don't get me wrong. They are correct, and so is Philip, in stopping them and being like, dude, guys, this is not the fucking time. However, I really want to know what the fuck he's talking about. And I am somebody that always, and this is something that I think can be sort of misunderstood by people who are used to someone who's very passive aggressive. I am not passive aggressive. If I'm angry, I'm going to sit you down and be like, look, I'm really angry at something that you did. And I will literally say those words and explain it and say, it felt like you were saying this and it really bothered me because I've been doing this and I don't understand how you could see things this way. And did you not think about how that was going to sound to me? I communicate very directly because it's faster. Like straight up, that's all it is. It's easier, it's faster, it's cleaner. But sometimes when somebody's very used to passive aggression, what I'm doing comes across as so aggressive that it seems malicious somehow. And that's not at all how I mean it. I'm trying to just have a upfront dialogue. But a person who isn't used to being confronted in a real way will see it as somehow like me trying to start a fight. So I understand that my communication style and my choice to be like, I'm going to parse your whole sentence. This moment where he's yelling at her and calling her certain things, she responds with, but you're those things, like my arrogance. And my response would be, when have I been arrogant? When have I had bad manners? And I would ask him to give me examples. I approach stuff a little bit lawyer-like, where I'm like, you present your argument. I'll present my argument. I will have a counter to some of the things that you said, as I'm sure you will have a counter to some of the things I said. And this might help us each see one another's perspective a little bit more clearly. And I have a very organized way of looking at it. But like I said, it isn't received well by everyone. It's just it totally depends on someone's personality and the way they've been accustomed to resolving conflict in the past. And unfortunately, passive aggression is just rampant. And so being at all direct is often not welcome. In this moment, with her deciding to go for the insult in response to him instead, rather than asking him what he means, I feel like she really loses all her ground here, because obviously we've been seeing things from her perspective. We 100% know why she feels he's arrogant. We 100% understand her frustration with him. And we have seen the many attempts she has made to try and make him feel welcome and included, and how she's attempted to keep her temper in check, even though she has been wildly irritated. So we can see that. But she doesn't engage with him on that level. She just decides to mudsling back at him, which at this point, it feels pointless, like just, it's not going to be accomplishing anything. And she even tells him to like go home, even though she knows that he is aware of what's happening here. And apparently nobody else is. He has experience with this, and she should be receptive to his information. But she's so angry at his assertions here that she lets that completely override her judgment. So Philip stops them both and like basically sort of forces them to sit in a way with like a magic. I'm assuming that she was a little bit taken aback that he had that kind of power. And this is when Rashawn says that usually they would need months to like create a wizardry that would be able to handle dealing with a star. But we don't have that kind of time. And he says the best way to cope is to bleed some power off the star and project it somewhere else, just like put it somewhere. And he just doesn't really have a suggestion. He just says anywhere you like. Bleed off too much mass and fusion in the star fails. Bleed off too little and the intervention merely makes the star's core go critical sooner. And she asks if it's going to go nova, and he says no, but there are worse things. And when she's like, what does that mean? There's a long pause, and he just kind of gives her this look and finally says, how would you like it if your star flared up just enough to roast one side of your world? That happened to our planet once. I'd have thought you'd noticed, or maybe you didn't read the orientation package. It's right there on the first page of the historical material. Okay, I said, I'm on record, I'm on tape, having mentioned that Doreen didn't seem to pay a lot of attention to his presses when he first arrived. She just straight up didn't know he was a prince. And then she goes back and reads it, but she doesn't read the history section, or reads it too fast, evidently. Doreen, this is another place where I feel like I can identify with Doreen a lot, but this is a spot where I just straight up don't get her. If you were given a presses on somebody and you met them and they were one of the most insufferable humans you had ever met in your life, I guess he's not human, but wouldn't you want to go back and read that presses from cover to cover? Wouldn't you want to know literally everything about this monster of a person? I would absolutely want to know everything. I just don't I don't understand her being so angry with him and frustrated and feeling like his actions make no sense. She's constantly why would he do that? It's not just about what a dick, but it's also the way he's choosing to handle certain situations that feels really mystifying to her. And dude, you've been literally given a stack of personal and historical information on that human being. Go read it. What is wrong with you? And so the fact that he is able to tell her all of this information was given to you and misresearch, just never read it. I can't decide if I find that to be within character and just infuriating, because Doreen can be infuriating, or if this feels like the author having Doreen act really out of character. And I kind of feel like it's the second one. This just doesn't hit for me as something that Doreen would do. I feel like she's somebody who tends to try and over-prepare for everything. She's a control freak. So the idea of her not arming herself with as much information as possible, especially when somebody starts to be a problem, I don't see it. that just doesn't ring true for me. It feels like it's a contrivance so that we get to this point. And honestly, this point isn't enough of a payoff to me to justify it all. And I think what she's trying to do as an author is be like, sometimes people are terrible, but then they have something that you don't know about going on. And like, honestly, so what? This is the kind of thing that I just get so irritated by. Like, giving somebody a motivation, a sad, tragic backstory doesn't excuse the fact that they suck. There are a lot of people out there with sad, tragic backstories who still manage to be kind, empathetic human beings. In fact, it influences them to be more kind and empathetic because they don't want other people to experience what they have. But Rashawn is giving no indication that this sad, tragic backstory informs his personality to a point that makes sense why he's acting this way. I'm just going to continue reading this. He says, my great-great ancestors were a family of wizards. Our star flared without warning. The land on that side of Willak was blasted to slag and lava. The seas on that side boiled off. The air on that side all burned away. The wizards of the world had just enough time between the flare and its wave front's arrival to isolate the spaceward side from the worst effects of the flare, and to keep the planet's ecology from being completely destroyed in the terrible winds and floods and fires that followed, but only just enough. It was very close, and almost all of the wizards died from giving all their power to keep the world and its people alive. Then after that, it took centuries of suffering and rebuilding for our world to recover. Half a world's atmosphere to restore, temperature differentials to even out, a shattered ecosystem to rebuild. The quick obliteration that a nova would have brought would have seemed to some merciful by comparison. But afterward, my ancestors spent generations learning how the sun behaved, finding out how to cure it, and they did cure it finally, though again, almost all of my line's wizards died in the cure. Why do you think my family are kings now? They gave their lives to save the world, to make sure it would never be saved again, never need to be saved again from death by fire, so that in any generation where a wizard is born into the royal family again, everyone looks at them and says, see, there's the son of the Sun Lord, the guarantor, there's the one who'll give his life to protect us. And she thinks to herself, without particularly asking what you had in mind to do with your life besides that, Direen thought. She found herself thinking of the view from the balcony of his family palace right across that very flat, strangely featureless landscape, right in the middle of the sealess, mountainless, melted down side of the world. Who built that there to make sure that the Sun Kings never forgot what they were there for, as if to say, we'll give them everything they want, but when the bad day comes again, they'd better deliver. And she says, I'm an idiot. I mean, you're an idiot for not reading the presses. I'll give you that. But I just don't get why this story gave him carte blanche to act like a douchebag. Just none of this is satisfactory to me. That's all I'm saying. Their argument doesn't come to a conclusion that feels like it makes sense to me. He never apologizes for his actions. He doesn't seem to feel that he was out of line in any way. She's the only one to apologize. And that feels totally unfair to me. His, story here, you could have opened up. Everybody was here talking about their situations, their planets and what it's like there. And you just didn't share with anybody. It's not absolutely totally on her to pull information out of you. Part of the deal with going to somebody else's planet is to share and interact and learn from each other. And you completely refuse to do that. So I am left asking the same question that she asked when she went to his planet, which is, why did you sign up for this? We never get that answered here either. And I really wanted her to bring that up again. What exactly is it he's here for? I don't get it. This whole thing it feels like we're having a conversation about a thing that isn't what needs talking about. Exactly. Except that I know that it is because it's a time-sensitive issue. The whole thing with the sun needs to be immediately dealt with. And I get that. But because I just have all this other baggage from their behavior, it doesn't feel like having any kind of confrontation right here worked for me in the bigger scheme of things. And maybe after they finish with their spell work, they will have more of a talk and this will like come together. But as of right now, I just don't really buy this contrivance that he had this like, you know, this historical incident weighing over him and she never read the information. I just feel like that's not in her nature. And her dad also got a presses. He was reading it too, right? Like, didn't we find out that he was given his own packet of information? Did he also completely overlook all of this like horrible planetary destruction history and just never mentioned it to her? Like, I mean, if he did and he just didn't mention it because he was trying to teach her a lesson about finding out what someone's situation is before snapping on them, I don't feel like that worked out. And if he did and just chose not to tell her for other reasons, I mean, I've already talked about finding it really weird, the conversation that he has with Tom that he never shares with Darine. What's going on here? It's bizarre because it feels like her dad is part of the story, but only like when the author feels like it and not really taken into account regarding various plot beats. So this did not work for me at all. I'm sorry. And I wanted it to, because having like a giant trauma to motivate a person can be pretty interesting, but I don't like it being handled like this, where it's something that completely, it's sort of meant to excuse them being a dick, and the way that they are a dick seems very unrelated to the trauma itself. There's no real explanation for that. And also the actual like facts of their history are for some reason not brought up until now, and you realize people really should have known or shared or whatever. It's too contrived. And at this point, Darine says, we've got to do something. Any luck finding a planetary wizard yet? From Spot. And Spot says no, but I do have an authorization. In the speech, very small, Darine saw the characters that spelled out the words, approved, go. Following those was a shorthand version of a wizardly name, but even the shorthand version was very long, and the power rating appended to it was so high that Darine looked at it several times to make sure she wasn't just misplacing a decimal point. This is a Galactic Arm Coordinator's ID. And this just basically confirms that shit's real bad. It made her feel no better in terms of an answer to the question of where Earth's wizardly command structure had gone all of a sudden. But at least she knew now she wouldn't be interfering with anyone else's intervention. All right, she said, let's go fix the sun. So what I'm curious about here is, like, was Rashawn's behavior and like the way that he has this sort of motivation meant to be part of the lesson from the powers that be? Like, was this all part and parcel of the same, and now she has to learn how to do like teamwork? I don't know. Okay, so we go to Kit, and he is laying around in bed until Ponch makes him get up. And he goes and talks to Quell. He almost like knocks her over and says, what's the relegates Neos? Why is he asking this question? I don't remember hearing about the relegates Neos. So when he just like blurts this out, I wasn't remembering where this came from. Was this in something that he read or like stumbled across somewhere? She says it's where the lone power lives. Kit stared. It lives here? Of course she does. Since when? Well, since after the choice. When she lost out, they built her a place of her own. Why in the one's name did they do that? Well, she bound herself into the world, and when she lost, she couldn't dissolve that relationship. She was stuck here. So they made her a place to stay. It's very nice, just a few thousand miles from here. That's where you go for an own choice. When you're a wizard here, we go see her and have a good talk with her and tell her she should have behaved herself. And you just walked away from that little conversation without having any further trouble? Well, yes, Quill said. Why not? What? Excuse me? This is like, well, yeah, well, we decided we didn't want anything to do with the devil, so we built him like this palace, and we just go talk to him like once we reach a certain age, and are just like, hey, devil, you are pretty bad. Shouldn't have been a devil. Thanks, bye. And it's like a bat mitzvah. What in the hell is she talking about? And she's acting like this is so obvious. And I'm like, dude, you just had this whole thing where they were asking about your choice and how that could possibly work this way here. And you just didn't think to mention that, oh yeah, and after that, the lone power settled here to live. I feel like that's a really important part of the story. Why would you not bring that up? Like, I don't know what's going on with people's communication in this book. That's all I'm saying. It's consistently like, why didn't so-and-so say anything about that? Why didn't they say anything? Why didn't this person say? It's like, and this is my least favorite kind of plot, when things hinge on, oh, I just didn't tell you this crucial piece of information. Why not? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it. They went and saw the choice in, which is like this big historical, like protected area that everybody goes to see when they're like kids. And yet she doesn't mention what happened right after that is still, you know, like, I don't understand how this just never came up. So he goes to the display and he's gone with Paunch, and he says, like, there's definitely something that has been left out. Something's not complete with this story. And Paunch is asking Kit what exactly the point is of the story. And Kit explains about entropy, and basically that people are like given the option to throw in with the lone one. And if they see that, well, death is inevitable, they may want to speed that up. They may just be like, well, if it's inevitable, then let's just do it now. And Paunch is like, I don't understand who would do that. I've never been real clear about that myself, Kit said, thinking, how can they do it? How can someone be angry enough or crazy enough to say, sure, if things are going to hell anyway, let's have them go there faster? Sometimes it looks like a species can get tricked into it, Kit said. When a choice happens, there are always representatives from life's side and death's side to argue the case. And there are always wizards there, sometimes a lot, sometimes just a few, or even just one. But finally it comes down to what the species itself decides, through its representatives at the choice. If the lone one offers them something they like the sound of, better than they like the sound of what life's offering, and they go for it, then bad things happen to that species, Paunch said. That's right. And usually bad stuff happens to the other species around them, too. If they already had death to begin with, it gets a lot worse. If they didn't have death, they get it. So all the people in that world have to deal with the results of that choice until their species ends. And wizards get born to try and make it better if it went badly. You could say a wizard's ordeal is his own version of that choice. Whether we like it or not, it looks like its choices all the way down. There's something about that line, its choices all the way down, that is simultaneously like reassuring and really discouraging. I was just kind of like, man, that's like, that feels really profound, but also, oh, I hate it. So Ponch is like, I think I may be able to find the information that got left out of this. And he is able to. And Kit doesn't ask him very much about how he's doing it. I really, really wanted Kit to ask Ponch more about how the fuck he's managing this, because I don't think we've ever seen Ponch do anything like this. We've seen him create these like pocket worlds, which is a totally different scenario, you know? But something like this, it seems like whatever was left out of this like transmission was done so on purpose to keep it secret. So how is it that Ponch can just like sidestep around that and be like, oh no, here it is. I found the file. You know, I really am curious about Ponch and his abilities. Yama says, so I understand Kit and Nita doing their own thing at their own time. But when Kit goes to see something with Ponch, why not take Nita with them? That was another thing. Because like Nita specifically has said that she's awake a lot more than Kit is. So there was a moment where I was like, well, maybe she's still asleep. But Ponch wakes Kit up by saying, Nita says you need to get up. So yeah, like we're explicitly told she's awake and she wants to see Kit. And he just completely just goes without her. That's a good point. Seems like a waste of the advantage that they are there together and can think together about it all. Agreed. Yeah, see, this book is not doing it for me. It's a shame because most of the time I feel like this author is really good at giving reasons why people are handling things the way they are. This is the first one in the series where I truly feel like nobody's behaving in a rational way or in a way that like aligns with their characters. There's, you know, if there was like some sense between Kit and Nita that they were arguing about something, disagreeing about something, or anything that would make him want some time by himself, maybe that would work for me, but there's nothing like that. I don't get that. So here's where we get the revised story. So the Lone Power in its avatar as Iktanike stepped aside with Dhruva. You are the wise one. You know what day your people are coming to in the far future. You know to what place they will come. The place from which they will not be able to move without help. My help. I'm not so sure about that, Dhruva said. I think our choice will still remain our own. Now tell me what you want. The destruction of hopes, the devaluation of life, the end of things. No, I mean, what do you want of me? You wouldn't have called me aside unless I had the ability to do something you want. I want you to let me into the heart of things. And he's like, yeah, okay. I'm definitely not doing that. I can give you the power to make sure they won't destroy themselves. They will eventually. You know it. They're so very happy with the way they are. But to every species comes a time when the way they are is not enough. When if they're going to go on living, they have to become something more, something different from what they've always been. If your fellow wizards enact the wizardry they're building at the moment, they'll also find that they've built themselves a trap from which there's no escape. And you know that's what they're doing too. You're trying to save them, but they're not listening to you. They're likely to listen to me even less if I talk to you much longer. Why should you care about that? You're the oldest wizard on this world, the wisest and strongest. You're the power source for this spell. If they become offended, just walk away from the spell. And he's like, what? Why would I just like not do the spell? So at this point, they try a different tact. Whatever the one may do for you, without me included in your world, your species will never be able to change or grow. And this was my concern in the first episode when Nita has this like unsettling dream. Or not first episode. I think that was probably the second one. And I said something like, you know, we think of destruction as an inherently bad thing, but you need it to do a new thing. And that's essentially what's being said here. Right, thank you. Yama's bringing up something else that I was going to say. She says, you're the oldest of the wizards in this world, the wisest and the strongest. And Yama says, so aren't older wizards less powerful than younger wizards, which also was how I thought it worked. I don't think that's exclusively on Earth, unless I'm mistaken. So why is that the thing? Is he being lied to about that? It doesn't seem like anybody else is arguing that point. So they're just sort of taking that as a given, and I didn't get that at all. So yeah, I just it's things like this where I'm sort of like, I don't know whether to bother bringing them up, because part of me is like, is this going to matter? But it's just, this is hammered on us with Dareen when we're in her perspective, and her thinking about when she was like a younger power and how much more she had and how sort of almost careless she was with it and how much she misses it now, which is just really a thing about youth in general, you know? So why, if we're going to hammer that with Dareen, are we going to say the exact opposite here? I don't get it. So at this point, the Lone One says, I'll give you enough power so that for the rest of your life, if indeed you don't trust me, you can step in to right whatever wrongs you think have been done. Which is a wild proposition that, to me, you would have to be so arrogant to accept that I am shocked he even considers it. Like, that's him basically personally taking on the entire future of this planet. Especially considering that he talks to her and is like, so we're going to make it so that I can basically live forever in any state that I want to. He is making himself into the Lord Ruler in Mistborn. And I don't understand what makes him feel competent enough to do this. And do you just not think the Lord Ruler is going to get you? The Lord Ruler. Well, the Lone One feels like a Lord Ruler too. But do you just not think that this ancient being of the original entropy of the universe is clever enough to sidestep your little fucking plan here? Granted, she gets an irritated expression on her face when he demands the power before the choice is made. So, to a point, he was a little bit sly and managed to surprise her with how savvy he was being. But nevertheless, she still went through with it. And I think if the Lone One agrees to anything, it means the Lone One sees an advantage, which means you're missing something, which means don't make this deal. It just inherently, anything the Lone One agrees to is bad. You know, I don't know. I feel like that's a really basic tenet that we can all agree on. So when you give me this power, what am I supposed to do for you? Just a small thing. Simply leave me a foothold in your world, a place where my essence can lie dormant until the day comes when you do need it for the change that is to come. With you as the eternal guardian of your world, I won't be able to do any harm. Kit knew that innocent look, and he went cold at the sight of it. The Lone One's going to make sure something happens to Druva sooner or later. It'll find a loophole, it'll kill him somehow. And then the Alaalids will be stuck with it in their world forever. He had the urge to go over to Druva and shake him and say, "Don't do it!" Kit's showing a great deal more wisdom than this ancient, powerful wizard. And he's 15 years old. I'm not impressed, Druva. So it gives him this power. And when he goes back to talk to his own people, they're like, we fucking saw that being give you a bunch of power. So we're really not super inclined to listen to anything you have to say. And Druva's like, look, you can think what you want. I'm going to do this. I'll do this spell with you. But it's not going to be the solution you guys all think it is, and I've just made a sort of backup plan for it. Lives will be long in our world, and there will be peace and prosperity and joy for an endless seeming time. But not forever. I see the doings of the day after forever, when our people realize they must change and cannot, and there won't be any release from the trap our present wizardry will have built for them. Only the day after forever will reveal the truth. So for now, if you want to enact the choice we've made, the wizardry that will protect our world, let's do so. But I will only power the wizardry if we add to it this stricture, that come the day after forever, when the children of 1,000 millennia from now finally realize they need to change their world and themselves, our descendants in power will be able to repeal this choice and make another that suits them better. And he says, we'll make it so that they can repeal it only if the choice to repeal it is unanimous. At first, they weren't going to take the deal. But when he says it has to be unanimous, they are all so confident that will never happen that they're like, all right, fine, sure, dodo bird. Who cares? Sure, let's do that then. And Kit watches them do it and just is like really impressed at the power of this enormous spell. And he watches all of the people like go home except for Dhruva. He stood and watched his colleagues go, and finally turned his own back and walked off the way Itkanike had gone. And I have to assume that that's like part of like him building this place for the Lone Power to go. Yeah, I don't know. They stepped out of the pool. Kit had to struggle, gasping up the last 6 or 10 feet. And when they came out, he looked down and found everything beneath them empty, just water. I think maybe I broke it, Ponch said. And I'm really curious how mad people are going to be about that. I feel like this is a pretty important historical monument, and he just trashed it. I feel like people would be pretty mad, but I don't know, you know. So we go back to Darine, and Rashawn is asking for information about their son. And he's like, your information like only goes back 30 or 40 years. Like I need at least 50 years, to which she's like, Earthlings are not advanced enough for that shit. So we're going to have to go into the manual and get information that way. And he says the star's active side is pointing away from us right now. And Philip says, well, the star doesn't rotate, though, so it won't stay that way. 600 hours per rotation of the sun. Did you guys know this? I have never bothered to look up the rate of rotation for the sun. I don't know why. I'm surprised because it's very large. I guess size doesn't really factor, though. Does it? In rate of rotation. It's slow, is what I'm saying. 1 day on the sun is 600 hours long. That's wild. So when they take away the time that's already passed, because 3/4 of it's gone, that leaves like 26 or 28 hours. And Rashawn says it's going to take nearly that long just to design the wizardry. And then we have to actually go implement it. And Philip loses his mind. Philip is fanboying so hard over the sun. It is hilarious. This is like if I was told I was going to meet Beyonce. Philip is overwhelmed with excitement and just keeps like blurting out, oh my God, we're meeting the sun. Oh, it's kind of adorable. And Darine is like, wait, we're going to the sun? And Rashawn is like, yeah, this is a really big wizardry. Us doing it is already too few people. And we're definitely not going to be able to do it from here. So, you know, even going and doing it in person is probably like, it's a risk. I don't know how we're even going to displace all the energy that we have to bleed off of the sun, because that is going to require a kind of like transmission power that will be sort of sustained. And how are we even going to do this? So let's see. They spent the next 12 hours and more constructing the wizardry. First the rough version, then the real one. Doreen had never been involved in such a detailed, exacting, exhausting piece of work in her life. Not even when Nita had called her in to assist with a big group wizardry in Ireland the previous summer. This time there were a lot fewer wizards involved, and the work the four of them were doing was in its way far more complex. So there comes this interesting moment. They're like creating this together. And there's a moment where, I love this so much. Rashawn says, we have to go into the sun, stick a conduit into it just underneath the tachocline, pull out some mass, then pull the shunt out and leave without burning ourselves to cinders. Oh, well, Scarrett said, nothing to it then. Rashawn and Doreen had found themselves giving Scarrett the same somewhat skeptical look. Then each of them had registered the other one giving him that look. And things had, from Doreen's point of view, somehow irrationally gotten a lot better between them. I definitely understand how that could be. You ever have that with somebody that you're like not really sure where you stand with them, and then you see their expression with somebody who's acting a fool, and you're just like, okay, we see this the same way. Well, that's something, 100%. They say there's nothing that unites people as much as a common enemy. And that's sort of like, it's not that Scarrett's an enemy, but it's like the same basic concept. Simply having stated the problem produced a number of further problems. Dump the material where? What was going to come out would emerge at a temperature of at least a couple of million degrees centigrade and would expand like mad before cooling down to ambient space temperature. It would closely mimic that of any number of H-bombs. Additionally, it had to be capable of conducting the material and not failing under the forces to which it was exposed, which meant pushing a tremendous amount of energy into it to produce the result. That was her main concern. And then, assuming they successfully built a wizardry that could handle these forces, the real excitement would start, because not even a relatively small and tame star like the sun was going to lie there and let you suction out this much mass without complaining bitterly about it. Now, here comes an aspect I didn't think about. The sun is sentient. I mean, in so much as anything is sentient, like a fucking head of lettuce. The sun is going to have shit to say about it and feel a certain way about it, which, how irritating. I mean, the sun's job is to nurture life though, right? I guess not necessarily. The sun does a whole lot of things, but I feel like there's got to be a way that you can cajole it. Be like, hey, you're going to torch our planet if we don't do this. You've got to help us out. I'm very interested in meeting the sun and seeing what the sun's attitude is. And toward the end of the first part of their work session, Rashawn, who had been helping rough out the major spell diagram, suddenly sat back, wiping his brow with one hand and looking completely horrified. "What's the matter?" Scarrett said. Rashawn sat looking at the rough spell diagram. "This is all for nothing," he said. "There's no way we can make this work." "He's seen it," Doreen thought. I didn't want to say anything. I was hoping he was going to pull some kind of rabbit out of the hat. Oh, God, what are we going to do now? And he says it's one thing to design the conduit, but it's another to power it. There are just 4 of us. We can't do this. And Doreen is looking at this and thinking to herself about what possible options there could be. And this is when she starts thinking about what it was like when she was young and had just this unlimited power. And all wizards are at their most powerful when they're youngest. Allegedly. But It seems like even for young wizards, Darine was particularly powerful. And there was a time when I could have driven this spell entirely by myself. In fact, I did do a smaller version of this in Ireland. I was a star once, but I'm now having to deal with the limitations of not being a star anymore. And I was like, I can't believe she doesn't reference the irony of that statement in the text. Really? She's talking about having been a star, and they're dealing with a star. Come on. It's right there. Anyway. And I love this. I guess there just comes a time where you can't bully the universe anymore. Man, if that isn't the fucking truth. So she suddenly comes up with something. She gets up and goes downstairs, and she comes back up with one of the custom world gates. And she looks at Rashawn and says, someone here has talent for reverse engineering when it suits him. And this, unlike any of us here, has no limit on how much matter it can move. It's subsidized. Oh, so it is. The problem, Darine said, is going to be control. You say that the amount of mass we have to remove is very specific, whereas once you stick this in the middle of a star and open it up, it's going to throw matter out the far end like a fire hose. What we need is the kind of control you get with a garden hose or an eyedropper. Calibrating it will be the exciting part. I really want to know where the other end of this is going to go. It doesn't seem like they've decided that still. Could they direct it toward another star that doesn't have a occupied planet revolving around it, so that it's just like, oh, that star just gets powered up temporarily and nobody gets hurt by it? I'm spitballing here on places to put H-bomb energy, you know? So drop it there so we can all get a good look at it. I can root it in one place. Oh my God, I don't know why that sentence was so hard to say. I can root it in one place and keep it from jumping around while you mobile types work on it. I love that he calls them mobile types. The spell construction that followed was complex beyond anything Darine had ever done. In fact, part of the complexity lay in that she wasn't doing it herself. And she couldn't do it herself because she no longer had the power for that kind of thing. They all had to do it together. As darkness fell, Rashawn laid out the outline for the full spell diagram, a glowing circle with 4 big lobes inscribed inside like a 4-leaf clover. For nearly half an hour, Darine had been referring back to Spa again and again as she laid in detailed information about the sun's interior characteristics. Her back hurt, her eyes hurt. She wondered if she was possibly getting astigmatism as Nita had years back, which I have. And it's just kind of annoying. It's not that bad. But I say this as somebody who's had bad eyesight their whole life, so whatever. If we live past tonight, I won't care if I need glasses. And then she realizes that she thought to herself, if we live past tonight, and she thinks about this later again and is like, oh my God, I need to not have that attitude about all of this. Let's see. I'm trying to find, there's a moment that I thought was kind of nice. Let's see. Darine didn't seem able to get past the thought, to her shame, while the others seemed a long way from worrying about it at all. The 3 of them were crouched, all their concentration bent on it, Rashawn tracing glowing spiderweb curve after curve of the wizardry's interface. Finlift's branches hung with faint, delicate statements and syllogisms for the speech. Scarret knitting glittering cat's cradles of fire between his claws and weaving them into the spell's basic control structures. He's the real star here, Darine thought. He's so good at everything. Look at how good he is at troubleshooting. He can find a weak link in a spell just by the smell of it. If we live through this, it's going to be because of him. And then she's like, oh, I just did it again. And she sort of realizes that when she was on her first ordeal, the thought of dying just didn't really like occur to her very much. And then just like, maybe it's because I was running for my life most of the time. It was a very active sort of ordeal. There wasn't a lot of sitting around constructing a spell with a bunch of people and being given like 12 hours of time to think over how much it could go wrong. And also, like you guys remember, in her ordeal, she creates like a whole planet and ecosystem. And I was like the whole time just thinking how wild it was that she doesn't seem to consider the consequences at all. She just creates this like robot race. And so, yeah, thinking ahead was never really Doreen's thing in that sense, like consequences. She would think ahead in terms of wanting to like have control over a situation. But, you know, different things. So she straightened up, her back immediately rewarding her with a spasm of pain. She looks around and doesn't see Philip. He took a rest break, probably. I could use one of those myself. And as she's walking outside, they are outside doing this. She walks toward the house. She overhears Philip say, "Ashamed of myself." "I don't see why," she heard her father say. And she pauses, and her dad continues, "After all, the fire you jump into isn't anything like the one you run away from." And Philip says, "It may burn you as badly." So is that he's like feeling weird about being excited about going to the sun when he reacted the way he did to the forest fire? Is that why he's ashamed of himself? That's how my people became sentient, they think, Philip said. They learned to run from the fire. They evolved mobility and later the beginnings of intelligence. And then the darkness at the fire's heart spoke to us and said, "You can be safe from me if you pay the price. Instead of burning terribly and dying in it, without warning and in awful pain, you'll burn just a little, but all the time, all your lives. At least you'll know what's coming instead of having to always live with the unexpected." And you decided that it was better to take your chances with the wildfires. And Philip nods and says, "Even though some of us said we wouldn't be what we are without the fire, that without it all growth chokes together and chokes out the light. Well, I think your people were smart. Light's better in the long run, even though you may not always like what it shows you." Even though some of us said we wouldn't be what we are without the fire. I mean, it's not like the fire is going away, though. It's still happening. It's just unexpected, like he says, the Lone Power says. At least you'll know what's coming instead of having to always live with the unexpected. It doesn't feel like they're just saying no to fire forever. It feels like they're just like accepting mortality in a different way. I don't know. I didn't really understand the way this conversation went. I felt like I was getting what the choice was, and then this conversation made me feel like I didn't anymore. And, you know, light's better in the long run, even though you may not always like what it shows you, is in response to all growth chokes together and chokes out the light. So people were arguing that you can't just continually grow without some destruction, which I would argue is true. And I would argue is exactly what's happening on Alaalu. But it doesn't sound like that's become a problem for Philip's people. So I'm a little bit... Is it supposed to imply that Philip's people are headed in the same direction as Alaalu's people? I am confused by this. And basically Philip says to her dad, like, "I appreciate you being kind to me when I was frightened. Although where we're going is the source of the light as well as the heart of the fire, it'd be all kinds of glory to die there. But I'd really rather not." "I'd rather none of you did," Doreen's dad said, "and you're not going to. My daughter's a pretty hot property as a wizard, and she's not going to lose anybody on her watch." The absolute certainty in his voice was somehow worse than anything Doreen could have imagined, and it made her eyes sting. Hastily, she stepped back into the shadows and turned to make her way back to where her attention belonged, to the spell. I will make Dad right, she thought, if it kills me. And I was just like, damn, that's a bleak spot to end it on. She keeps being like, I can't think if we make it out of this alive. But then she ends it with, if it kills me. And I'm like, girl, you really should take your own advice. You don't need to go into it like this. But yeah, so that's the end of that section. That chapter, I should say. Maybe that's it. Yama says, I thought just that trees live long lives and grow for a long time, but I don't know either. That's true. I don't really know what their lifespan is like. I don't really get, if you reject the lone one, you still inevitably are subject to entropy. But you would have been throwing into faster entropy if you agree to his rules. So people who are like, well, if like continual growth blocks out the light, that's not the alternative. They're not just growing, even on Alaalu, they die. It's just that they're still somehow there, which is odd. Is that also how it is in Philip's world? Are they still around? Like, are they still on the air? Sort of in the same way that they are in Alaalu, where you can like hear them whispering? I don't... Mordecai says, isn't that what he offered? The lone one says, accept me to escape death. Yeah, but not exactly. He says it like it's, oh yeah, you won't die. But there's an understanding that there's something that will be like a suffering and a decay that is separate somehow, that you can't get around. Like the whole just burn a little all your lives. You're okay, maybe you're not dying, but there's still a destruction built into the system that is unavoidable. And in trying to avoid it, you cause more suffering if you just cling to this, and it doesn't even seem like the lone one tries too hard to lie, because I don't feel like the lone one... It seems like he tries to use logic most of the time rather than like, although Kit does say people have been tricked into it. Yama says, it makes no sense to accept him and escape death. My brain doesn't compute. Mordecai says, I feel like he says that and everyone goes, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, is that it's just sort of like, I feel like he would have come up with a better pitch by now. But just the argument that Philip was saying people were making, I guess those were people who did believe what the lone one was trying to sell, like at face value, and that's the difference. Mordecai says, like, he's like, no death with me, and everyone goes, how's that work though? Yeah. Yeah, this is, I would be interested in seeing a civilization where they accepted the lone one's deal. I would like to understand how that was picked by them, because like Kit even says in response to Ponch that he doesn't understand who would make that choice either. So obviously it's really infrequent, and it's something that like the mentality behind it doesn't make a lot of sense to most people. And I would just kind of like to see a situation in which I could see myself making that same choice. A circumstance in which, oh, I could see how you might be like fooled into this, or how in a moment of desperation this seems like reasonable. I would just like an example, So anyway, all right, so that's the end of the chapter. And I don't know. The whole thing with Rashawn is just really falling short for me. We'll see how that goes. The stuff on Alaalu I'm finding a little bit confusing because of Kit going into things without Nita, and the like inconsistencies with the like ages of the wizards and stuff. I'm just not totally feeling like I'm getting it, but maybe it'll come together for me. So we will see. But I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. Thank you, Yama, again for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you guys again soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.